The music in the room died the moment I saw him. My husband, Damien Cole. His hands sliding around the waist of a blonde in cobalt satin. He raised his champagne flute, calling her my girlfriend in the middle of my Riverton villa, my house, my money, my lawyers. Then he pointed at me, introducing me as used goods to the elite circle he swore I'd never fit. I didn't cry. I had the signatures, the cameras, the witnesses. Tonight, he was not humiliating me. I was exposing him. My name is Addison Stewart, and this was supposed to be my humiliation, the invitation, which I'd found tucked into the driver's side visor of my Range Rover, had been printed on an absurdly thick, cream-colored cardstock. An evening of new beginnings at Riverton Hill, it read, Damien, my husband, had always favored aesthetics over substance. He was hosting this in my house, a house he was legally barred from entering without my express permission, which I had strategically given just 2 days prior for what I'd framed as a final private discussion. He had, in his predictable arrogance, interpreted this as a sign of my weakness. He thought I was ready to fold, to negotiate away my dignity for a quiet exit. He thought this party was his coronation, a trial run, as he'd accidentally revealed in a voicemail left for one of his dubious investors, to introduce his new prize, Sabrina Vale, to the Hudson Valley's financial elite, the circle he had spent our entire marriage trying to penetrate, using my name and my money as his battering ram. I walked in at 8:30, deliberately late, bypassing the valets I hadn't hired. The theme, judging by the sea of black tuxedos and jewel-toned gowns, was desperate glamour. Sabrina was the centerpiece in her cobalt blue satin, a dress that clung to her like a second, cheaper skin. She was standing beside Damien near the grand fireplace, under my grandmother's favorite cassette. My attire was the subject of immediate, whispered debate. I had chosen a simple, impeccably tailored black cashmere turtleneck and wide-leg wool trousers. I looked less like a guest and more like the woman who owned the bank, which, in many ways, I wasn't here to party. I was here to close an account. Damien saw me first. His smile, that practiced, easygoing charm he used to disarm everyone, faltered for a fraction of a second. He hadn't expected me to actually show up. He thought I'd be in my Manhattan apartment, weeping into a throw pillow. He recovered quickly, whispering something to Sabrina, who then preened, adjusting a strap on her dress. He was painting me as the hysterical, spurned wife. Good. Let him. He strode towards me, champagne flute in hand. Addison, he said, his voice loud enough to carry, projecting a false, pitying warmth. I'm so glad you could make it. I wasn't sure you'd be up for any of this. It's my house. Damien, I said, my voice quiet, forcing him to lean in slightly. Where else would I be? His eyes hardened. This was not in his script. He needed to re-establish control, to recenter the narrative on his new leading lady. He grabbed a fresh glass from a passing tray and returned to the fireplace. He tapped the glass with a heavy gold signet ring I'd bought him in Geneva. The chatter, a dull roar of stock tips and summer rental complaints, slowly died. Friends, he began. Colleagues, thank you all for coming to our home. A flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. Judge Hamlin, an old money fixture whose family had practically built Riverton, raised a single, bushy eyebrow. He and his wife were my grandmother's oldest friends. They knew exactly who owned this home. Tonight is about new beginnings, Damien continued, his free hand finding Sabrina's waist. He pulled her flush against his side. It's about embracing the future, and I want to share that future with all of you. First, I want to properly introduce you to the most incredible woman I have ever met, my girlfriend, Sabrina Vale. He paused for the applause. It was hesitant, scattered. This was, after all, a room full of people who had, for the past 5 years, been eating my food and drinking my wine at parties I hosted. They were confused. And then, Damien turned, a look of profound, theatrical sadness on his face. He pointed his flute directly at me. And of course, I see my ex-wife, Addison, has joined us. A collective, sharp intake of breath. Ex-wife. The word hung in the air, heavy and toxic. She's just here to pick up a few last things, he finished, his tone laced with a cruelty meant to sound like gentle dismissal. He was branding me as the past, as the woman who had been discarded. He was making me small, a piece of leftover business in his grand, new life. The silence that followed was nothing like the one he had commanded. This silence was absolute. It was cold. It was heavy with judgment. Every eye in that room, Judge Hamlin's, the venture capitalists from the city, the old guard matriarch swiveled from Damien to me, and in that moment, they were not looking at the woman he had just tried to erase. They were looking at the owner. They were looking at the name Stewart, which was carved into the marble mantle behind him. They were looking at the Jean-Michel Basquiat in the foyer and the Helen Frankenthaler in the dining room, artworks that were part of the Stewart collection, famous in its own right. They were looking at the woman whose family had owned the very land this house stood on for 3 generations. They knew, every single one of them, that Damien Cole had walked into this marriage with 2 good suits and a leased BMW. They knew who I was. Damien's smile tightened. He had expected shock, yes, but he had expected them to be shocked for him, at my audacity. He had not anticipated this icy, unified stare of social condemnation. He had miscalculated the room. I let the silence stretch, letting him drown in it. I let him feel the weight of their gaze. Then I smiled. It was not a big smile. It was a small, tight, precise little thing, a smile that said, "Proceed." And across the room, tucked behind a potted palm near the terrace doors, a man in a gray polo shirt, indistinguishable from the catering staff, saw that smile and discreetly tapped his earpiece. It was the signal. The audio was live. The high-definition microcameras, installed 3 days ago under the guise of a security upgrade, were rolling. Everything was ready. Damien thought he had walked into a private negotiation 2 nights ago. He thought he was coming here to bully me, to tell me his terms, to tell me that if I didn't agree to his fair division of my property, he would drag my name through the mud with Sabrina as his star witness. He thought he had me trapped, so I had simply changed the venue. I had let him send out his ridiculous invitations. I had, in fact, forwarded the digital copy to a few extra people he'd forgotten, the real power players, the ones whose opinions he so desperately craved. I had turned his private ambush into a public tribunal. "You'll never fit into my elite circle, Addison," he had told me, hissing the words in this very library just 6 months ago, after I'd refused to fund his latest disastrous real estate fantasy. "You don't have the pedigree. You're too practical, too blunt. They'll never accept you." He was right about one thing. I wasn't like them. I wasn't built on pretense and borrowed prestige. I was built on a foundation of steel, concrete, and measurable, audited results. And tonight, the elite circle he worshipped was about to watch him get liquidated. I did not move. I did not raise my voice. I simply stood there, in my practical, powerful black, and held my ground. My house, my money, my legacy, and in my left hand, held casually at my side, was a slim, dark gray tablet. On its screen, unseen by anyone but me, was a single, ready-to-play audio file labeled Cole Strategic LC Sell Off. He had no idea what was coming. He thought this was his victory speech. He had no clue it was his eulogy. It was almost 5 years ago. I see it now, not as a memory, but as a meticulously blocked scene from a play I didn't know I was in. I was at a small, crowded coffee shop 2 blocks from the Meridian Stewart Holdings building, the one my grandmother had bought in the 1980s. It was my office, but at the time, I was deliberately living a different life. I wore jeans, a gray t-shirt, and an old wool coat. My hair was pulled back. I was just Addison, a woman who, as I told people, worked in finance. It was a shield. After my grandmother passed and I inherited everything the industrial real estate portfolio in Chicago, the private equity firm in New York, I had become paranoid. I wanted, just once, to find someone who was interested in me. Not my balance sheet. He was the opposite. He looked like the cover of a magazine for aspiring entrepreneurs. A perfectly tailored navy suit, no tie, a crisp white shirt open at the collar. He looked confident, sharp, and utterly out of place in the modest little cafe. He was standing behind me in line. I'd just grabbed my large black coffee and was turning to leave when he, accidentally, jostled my arm. The coffee scalding hot went everywhere, all over my hand, my coat, the floor. "Oh my God," he said, his voice instantly full of theatrical concern. He was grabbing napkins, dabbing at my coat before I could even react. "I am so sorry. I was checking an email. I didn't even look up. Are you okay? Is that a burn?" He was all apologies and charm. Before I could say it was fine, he was steering me to a table, telling the barista he needed a new large black coffee, a cold water, and a first aid kit. "Just in case. Please," he said, sitting across from me, his eyes a very earnest shade of blue locked on mine. "I'm Damien, and I feel terrible. Let me at least buy you a new coffee, and maybe lunch, and possibly dinner, to make up for third-degree burning my way into your life." It was smooth, too smooth, but I was tired, and he was handsome, and it felt, for a moment, like a normal, clumsy human interaction. I accepted the coffee, I declined lunch, but I gave him my number. He called himself Damien Cole, a self-made man. That was his entire brand. Over our first few dates, which escalated from coffee to dinner with alarming speed, he painted his portrait with practiced, subtle strokes. He came from nothing, he'd say, staring into the middle distance, raised by a single mom in a rough part of Cleveland, taught himself finance by reading library books, because college wasn't an option. He was now, he claimed, trying to claw his way into the high-end real estate market. It was a narrative designed in a lab to disarm me. I, who had been given everything, had a deep, almost reverent respect for those who built their own lives. He was hitting every single one of my triggers. He didn't just respect hard work. He was hard work. The next 4 or 5 months were a blur of curated perfection. He was the most attentive man I had ever met. He remembered that I hated cilantro. He noticed I preferred Sancerre to Chardonnay. He'd text me in the middle of the day. "Just thinking about that brilliant point you made last night about logistics." He would also, occasionally, let the facade crack, just enough to show me a glimpse of the vulnerable boy underneath. He'd talk about the shame of having to use food stamps, or how he'd been bullied for wearing the wrong shoes. It was calculated to make me want to protect him, to nurture him, to prove that I wasn't like the other rich people who had looked down on him. My one mistake, my colossal, life-altering error, was one of omission. I had let him believe I was just a senior analyst at Meridian. He knew I was comfortable, but he had no idea of the scale. I liked, for the first time, being the less ambitious, less successful one in the couple. I liked that he had his own drive, his own hunger. I finally told him the truth on a rainy Tuesday, about 5 months in. We were at a tiny, cash-only Italian place in Soho. The kind of place my grandmother would have loved, no pretense, just brilliant food. We were sharing a bottle of Chianti, and he was talking about a deal he was trying to put together, a small residential building. "I just need to get in front of the right people, Addie," he said, rubbing his temples. "It's all about access." And I thought, I can give him that. I can help him. It's time. "Damien," I started, putting my glass down, "there's something I need to tell you about my job, about Meridian." I laid it all out. I wasn't at Meridian Stewart Holdings. I was Meridian Stewart Holdings. The name wasn't a coincidence. It was my grandmother's. I explained the Chicago portfolio, the New York firm. I didn't give him numbers, but he was smart enough to guess the scale. I watched his face, terrified. This was the moment they either ran, or their eyes glazed over with dollar signs. Damien did something brilliant. He did almost nothing. He just sat there, his expression unreadable. He let the silence stretch. Then, he slowly put his fork down. He looked at me, not with greed, but with what looked, to my hopeful eyes, like a profound, sad understanding. "All this time," he said, his voice soft. "You thought that's what that I was like them, that I was after your money." "No, Damien, it's not that," I rushed to say. "It's just complicated." "Complicated," he repeated. He leaned across the table and, in that tiny crowded restaurant, he took my hand. "Addison, I don't care about the name on the building. I fell in love with the woman who shows up at a coffee shop at 7 a.m. with spreadsheets in her bag. I fell in love with you, your brain, your ridiculous obsession with 80s movies. This," he squeezed my hand, "doesn't change anything for me, except that I'm angry. I'm angry that a world exists where you had to hide who you are from me." I almost cried with relief. He wasn't scared off. He wasn't intimidated by my intelligence or my power. He was drawn to it. He wasn't a fawning sycophant or a gold digger. He was, I thought, my equal. He was the first man who wasn't afraid of my sharpness. I believed him. I believed him so completely that I married him 7 months later. Looking back, I can see the wires and the stage direction. I can see the careful research he must have done, targeting the quiet woman from the Meridian building. I can see how his accidental coffee spill was just an opening line. It turns out he wasn't afraid of my sharpness. He was just a con artist who had studied his mark. I wasn't the first woman he'd given that speech to. I was just the one with the biggest portfolio. He had read this exact script, with this exact manufactured vulnerability, many times before. He just had to change the name of the character. We were married 7 months after that first coffee spill. It was a whirlwind, a blur of vendor contracts and venue deposits that I paid for, rationalizing that it was faster and simpler than untangling our finances. We moved into the Riverton Hill estate, the sprawling stone manor my grandmother had left me, the place she had run her empire from for 40 years. I remember the first time Damien walked into the main gallery after the movers had left. He just stood there, staring at the walls. The collection wasn't just decoration, it was a timeline of my grandmother's savvy, an aggressive portfolio of post-war art. He ran a hand over the frame of a small, vicious Francis Bacon. "I just can't believe it," he breathed, his voice filled with a genuine awe I mistook for appreciation. "I can't believe this is ours. It's mine," I said, lightly, adjusting a lampshade. "But you live here now, so you get to look at it." I meant it as a joke, a gentle clarification, but I saw it, just for a second. A flicker of something cold and appraising in his eyes. It was a look of profound, primal offense, and then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by that easy, charming smile. "Right," he laughed. "Of course, boss." I didn't recognize that look then. I see it now. It was the look of a predator who had just been reminded the cage bars were still there. The encroachment began slowly, socially. He was a brilliant host, far better at it than I ever was. I was good at boardrooms. He was good at drawing rooms. He started inviting his contacts and potential partners to the house for dinners, for weekend salons. He always referred to it as our place. "We'd love to have you at our place in Riverton," he'd say on the phone, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. Then came the redecorating. "Addie, this furniture it has history," he'd say. "But it doesn't scream power. It doesn't reflect who we are now." He bought a $30,000 Italian sofa that looked like a cloud and felt like a rock. He replaced my grandmother's solid mahogany desk with a glass and chrome monstrosity. It all went on the Stewart household account, which was, of course, my account. It was all justified as a necessary investment in our brand, and to create a synergistic style. I let it happen. I told myself it was just furniture. About a year into the marriage, he came to me with his first big business proposal. "I found this residential project in West Bay," he said, spreading architectural renderings across the kitchen island. It's undervalued. The zoning is a mess. But I know the guy on the council. If Meridian Stewart Holdings puts in the seed capital, we could triple the investment in 2 years. I was skeptical. Damien, I don't mix business and... It's not mixing, he insisted, his tone earnest. It's synergy. Your company gets a fantastic, below-market return. I get the one big success I need to finally play in your league. It's a win-win. Addison, trust my numbers. So I did what I do. I put my personal feelings aside, and I ran the numbers. I sent my own private audit team to assess the land, the permits, the projections, and, annoyingly, he was right. The numbers were solid. The project was sound. So, I authorized the investment. I treated him like any other developer I'd work with. The West Bay project was, as he'd promised, a massive success. It was completed under budget, sold out in 6 months, and Meridian's holdings grew by several $1 million. Damien was triumphant, and he cashed in his victory, not with me, but on me. I need a more formal role, Addie, he said, a few weeks after the last unit closed. The success of West Bay proved I have the vision, but when I talk to people, I'm still just your husband. I need a title. I need a real advisory role at Meridian. I resisted, but he'd been smart. He had given me a profitable win. To deny him now would seem petty, personal, so I gave in. He became a special projects consultant. He got a handsome 6-figure salary, a corner office on my floor, and, most importantly to him, a Meridian Stewart Holdings email address. That email was the key. It unlocked everything. He started by just sitting in on strategic planning meetings. Then he was offering a fresh perspective on my long-term investment strategies. Then he was demanding to be introduced to my network, the real network, not just the local Riverton crowd, but the old money families and the institutional fund managers my grandmother had cultivated for decades. "You're hiding me, Addison," he'd accuse, his voice low and wounded. "You're ashamed of me. You won't let me help you build our future." And then, the direct attacks began. They were subtle, like paper cuts. We'd be dressing for a charity gala. "Are you really wearing that?" he'd ask, frowning at my simple, elegant Armani. "The women at the Hamlin Circle, they'll be in couture. You look a little frugal." Another time, after I'd bluntly corrected a banker at a dinner party, Damien hissed at me in the car on the way home. "You can't just out-data people like that. Addie, these families value pedigree. They value a certain softness. You come off as too practical, too blunt." Too practical. The very thing he had supposedly fallen in love with at that coffee shop was now my greatest liability. I found myself changing. I'd buy a dress I hated because he said it projected the right image. I'd hold my tongue in a meeting when I knew an idea was idiotic, just to let him feel powerful. I told myself it was compromise. I told myself marriage was about sharing, about supporting your partner's dreams. But a cold, quiet part of me, the part that was all my grandmother, had started a mental file. I started tracking every our and we and my that he used. Every time he claimed ownership of my accomplishments, I filed it away. Every time he made me feel small in my own house, I noted it. The final entry in that file was made last Thursday. He was hosting one of his parties. I was standing in the library, watching him through the open terrace doors. He was on the veranda, the one overlooking the Hudson. He was smoking a cigar, one of the rare Cubans from my father's humidor, and holding court with 3 men from a competing private equity firm. He gestured expansively at the house, at the gardens, at the twilight view. "It's a beautiful old place," one of the men said. Damien chuckled, a deep, proprietary sound. He blew a perfect smoke ring into the dusk. "It has good bones," he said, his voice carrying clearly into the library. "But it's stuck in the past. I'm in the process of modernizing the entire estate, bringing it up to my standards." He wasn't my partner. He was an invasive species, and I finally, fully, understood he wasn't just trying to share my life. He was planning a hostile takeover. The end came on a Tuesday. It's a cliché, I know, but the architecture of our lives is built on the mundane, and so is its demolition. I had a 9 a.m. meeting in the city with a private equity group from Zurich. They were notoriously difficult, always looking for reasons to pull funding, but at 8:50, I got an email. Their flight was delayed by fog. The meeting was postponed until the following day. I felt a sudden, sharp relief, a whole, unscheduled day. The drive back up to Riverton felt like a small rebellion, a stolen slice of time. I thought I might go for a swim, or just sit in the library and read a book that had nothing to do with capital gains. I saw his car as I came up the gravel driveway, the leased BMW, parked arrogantly in the center of the motor court, as if it owned the place. A small, cold knot formed in my stomach. He had been so specific. "I'll be in the city all day, Addie, back to back to back. Don't even bother waiting up for me." His special projects consultant role, it seemed, was very demanding. The house was silent. Maria, the head housekeeper, was usually there, but the kitchen was dark. He must have given the staff the day off. Another small, calculated detail that I'd missed. I walked through the foyer, my flat-heeled boots silent on the marble. I was halfway to the kitchen to make myself a coffee when I heard it. A laugh, high-pitched, performative, and female. It was coming from the master wing. From my bedroom, I knew that laugh. It belonged to Sabrina Vale, the 20-something assistant he'd insisted on hiring 3 months ago. "She just has the right style, Addie," he'd argued. "She understands the aesthetic we need to project." I'd foolishly argued about the cost of her salary, not the cost of her proximity. My heart didn't break. It did something else. It turned into a cold, heavy stone in my chest. My blood, which had been warm with the thought of a free afternoon, turned to ice. My hands, I noticed with a distant sort of curiosity, were perfectly, utterly still. There was no shaking. There was just clarity. I walked up the main staircase, not rushing, not hesitating. I made no sound. The heavy oak door to the master suite was closed, but not latched. I could hear them more clearly now. His low murmur, her responding giggle. I didn't knock. I'm the one who paid for the goddamn door. I pushed it open. They were in my bed, the one my grandmother had been born in, the one her grandmother had shipped from Scotland. They weren't moving. They were lounging, propped up against my pillows, wearing my hotel-style bathrobes. A half-empty bottle of my best champagne, a gift from the Zurich Fund, was sitting in a melted bucket on the nightstand. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was an occupation. They were settlers, colonizing my life. They saw me at the same time. Sabrina screamed, a pathetic little sound, and tried to pull the robe tighter, as if modesty was her primary concern. Damien. His reaction was the one I'll never forget. He didn't look guilty. He looked annoyed. He looked like I had just interrupted a very important business meeting. "Addison," he said, sitting up, the robe falling open. You're home early. This isn't what it looks like." "Get out," I said. My voice wasn't a shout. It was a flat, dead, quiet command. It sounded foreign, even to me. "Addie, come on," he started, swinging his legs over the side of the bed, reaching for, my sympathy. "Let's be rational. We can talk about this. We can be civilized." "Sabrina," I said, and my voice was so cold it made her flinch. "You have 60 seconds to be out of my house before I have you arrested for trespassing." I turned my back on both of them. I walked into my dressing room, a room the size of most apartments, a room he had never been allowed to re-style, and I locked the door behind me. I heard frantic scrambling from the bedroom, whispers, his voice, rising in anger. "Just get your damn clothes. What did you expect? I didn't pack clothes. I opened the floor safe behind my shoe collection. I took out my personal laptop, the one with the encrypted drives. I took the physical bearer bonds my grandmother had left in a separate trust. I took the small, velvet-wrapped box containing her pearls and her father's signet ring. I took my backup hard drives and my emergency passports. It was my fleeing a natural disaster kit. I just hadn't realized the disaster was already living in my house. I zipped the duffel bag. I waited. I heard the bedroom door slam. I heard their footsteps hurrying down the main stairs. I heard the front door open and close. I unlocked the dressing room. The bedroom was a scene of devastation. The sheets were tangled, the champagne bottle was overturned, and the sickly sweet smell of her cheap perfume was everywhere. I didn't look at it. I walked downstairs. Out the front door I just heard them use, and got into my car. I didn't look back. I drove to Manhattan, to a small, unassuming pre-war apartment on the Upper East Side. It was still held in a blind trust, a remnant of my grandmother's paranoia. It was the one asset I had never, ever told him about. I spent 2 weeks in a fog of pure, cold activity. I changed every password. I froze every joint account there were only 2. A concession I'd made for household expenses. I put a new, more aggressive security team at the Riverton house and had the locks changed. I worked 12-hour days at the office. My focus so sharp it felt like a weapon. I did not cry. I did not sleep. I just functioned. And then, exactly 2 weeks after I'd walked out, the papers arrived. A bike messenger delivered a thick, cream-colored envelope to my office, addressed to Addison Stewart. It wasn't from a divorce lawyer. It was from a corporate litigation firm. I sat at my desk, the one that had been my grandmother's, and I read the petition. He wasn't just filing for divorce. He was suing me. He was demanding a fair and equitable distribution of marital assets. He wanted the Riverton house. He wanted the art collection. He wanted the wine cellar. And then I saw the final item. He was demanding a 50% stake in the appreciation value of Meridian Stewart Holdings, retroactive to our wedding day. His justification, outlined in 10 pages of arrogant, self-aggrandizing prose, was that his vision and strategic contributions had fundamentally increased the value of my entire portfolio. He was claiming credit for the West Bay project. He was claiming credit for the relationships he'd brought in. He was claiming my grandmother's legacy was now, in part, his. The fog didn't just lift, it evaporated. The numbness was gone, burned away by a sudden, white-hot, clarifying rage. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was a long con. The affair wasn't the betrayal. It was just the exit strategy. Sabrina wasn't the reason. She was just the crowbar he was using to pry open my life and gut it. This wasn't a messy breakup. This was a rehearsed, meticulously planned extraction. He had approached me, infiltrated my life, seized what he could, and now he was liquidating his assets. I put the papers down on my desk. I was breathing evenly. My hands were steady. I picked up my private line and dialed a number I knew by heart. Monica Hartfield's office, her assistant answered. It's Addison Stewart, I said. Please tell her it's urgent. A click. Addison. My God. It's been years. How are you? I'm well, Monica. Thank you, I said, my voice perfectly level. But I have a problem. It's about my husband. Ah, she said, her voice sharpening. A divorce. It's always messy, dear, but we'll protect you. No, I said, looking down at the lawsuit on my desk. Not just a divorce. It's a hostile takeover, and he's been rehearsing. Monica Hartfield was a woman carved from granite, with a mind like a steel trap. She had been my grandmother's personal lawyer for 30 years, which meant she had seen and buried everything. She wore no makeup. Her gray hair was pulled into a severe bun, and her office was blessedly free of the faux sympathetic art that most lawyers use to soften their clients. Monica believed in harsh lighting and harsher truths. She didn't offer me coffee or condolences. I had hand-delivered Damien's lawsuit. She read all 12 pages in a silence so profound it felt louder than a scream. She didn't flinch. She didn't sigh. She just read. When she finished, she placed the pages on her immaculate desk, aligning them perfectly with the edge. Well, she said, her voice dry as old paper. He's not just greedy. He's ambitious. Can he do this? I asked. Can he actually claim half of Meridian? He can claim anything, Monica said, tapping a finger on the document. He's claiming his vision and contributions grew your company. This isn't a divorce filing. Addison, this is a corporate raider's prospectus. He's playing dirty, and he's playing for keeps. His lawyers are the scum of the earth. Their entire strategy is to bleed you dry. They'll file motion after motion, bury us in discovery, leak nonsense to the press. He wants to drag you through this swamp for 5, maybe 10 years, until you're so exhausted and so publicly stained that you'll pay him anything to make him go away. I don't get exhausted, I said. Monica almost smiled. That's your grandmother talking. Good, because he's counting on you being a grieving wife. We need to remind him you're a steward. She leaned forward. This is too polished. Too aggressive for a first-timer. This isn't a man who just cheated and got greedy. This is a man with a business model. My blood ran cold. Business model. Exactly. I'm going to hire someone, she said, already picking up her phone. Not just a PI who looks for hotel receipts. I'm hiring a forensic team. We're not just going to look into his last 6 months. We're going to excavate his entire life. The report came 4 days later. It wasn't a physical file. It was a secure, encrypted link. Monica and I sat in her conference room, watching the data populate a large screen. His self-made past was a fabrication. He had gone to college, a decent state school, before dropping out. His mother wasn't a struggling single parent. She was a dental hygienist who was, by all accounts, a perfectly nice woman. The Damian Cole he presented to the world was a fictional character, and I wasn't his first audience. Julia Markham, Monica read, clicking on a file. Married 2014. Founder of a biotech startup in Austin. He met her at a fundraiser, spilled a tray of champagne on her. 2 months later, he was consulting on her company's expansion. 1 year later, they were divorced. He walked away with $500,000 and her company was mysteriously in debt, forcing a distress sale. My stomach turned. A spilled drink, a consulting role. And then, Monica continued, there's Evelyn Price. A new file opened, a woman with soft, southern features and sad eyes, posing outside a Charleston bank. From a very old, very private banking family in South Carolina, he met her 3 months after leaving Julia, convinced her he was the man to modernize their family's antiquated trust management. He created a new high-yield investment vehicle. A shell company, I whispered, the words tasting like ash. A shell company, Monica confirmed. He siphoned off an unknown amount. Evelyn is still, to this day, in a private mental health facility. Her family managed to suppress the whole thing to avoid a scandal, but one of her brothers is still tied up in a quiet, vicious lawsuit, trying to prove Damian forged his sister's signature on a series of loans. The screen filled with more data, news clippings, social media photos. There was Damian, proposing to Julia on a sailboat, the same earnest, romantic look in his eyes. There he was, toasting Evelyn at a gala, his hand on her waist, possessive, the same suit, the same script, the I came from nothing speech, the I'm not intimidated by your success validation, the let me help you build infiltration. I was just version 3, the biggest, most lucrative acquisition yet. He's learning, I said, my voice flat. He got $500,000 from Julia. He got more from Evelyn, but it got legally complicated. He's refining his process. With me, he went for the 50% appreciation. He's not just a con man, he's a startup, and he's been iterating his product. Worse, Monica said. She clicked on the last file. It was from a new investigator, one tasked with monitoring Damian's current activities. He's not just relying on the lawsuit, he knows a judge might laugh him out of court, so he's creating his own evidence. On the screen, a series of documents appeared, memos, dated over a year ago, supposedly from Damian to me, outlining key strategic insights that directly corresponded to Meridian's biggest stock gains, an additive to our prenuptial agreement, which looked suspiciously like my signature, granting him joint oversight of the Riverton property in case of marital dissolution. He's faking documents, I said. He's manufacturing a paper trail. This is wire fraud. This is forgery. This is criminal, Monica said, her eyes glinting. And this is our leverage. I stood up and walked to the window. The city, 20 floors below, looked fake, like a model. He wasn't just trying to divorce me, he was trying to erase me. To replace my history with his fabricated one, to claim my grandmother's legacy as his own invention. I thought about Julia Markham. Her company sold for parts. I thought about Evelyn Price, in a quiet room somewhere, her life ruined. This was bigger than a lawsuit. This was bigger than my money. This was about stopping a predator from ever hunting again. Monica, I said, turning back from the window. A civil suit is defense. I want to go on offense. I'm ordering a full internal forensic audit of every single project Damien ever touched, every invoice, every vendor, every consulting fee he ever authorized. Addison, she warned. That will be expensive. I don't care, I said. I want to find his shell company, the one he's using on me. For the next week, I lived at the office. We brought in a team of auditors who were known for finding ghosts. We slept in shifts, subsisting on black coffee and cold pizza. We tore apart the West Bay project, the one he was so proud of. On the surface, it was clean, profitable, but then one of the junior auditors found it, a logistics consultant fee, then another, and another, all paid to a single entity LLC I had never heard of. Cole Strategic Partners LLC. The address was a P.O. box in Delaware. The invoices were vague, all for strategic advisement and project management oversight. The costs had been subtly inflated, spread across dozens of line items, buried so deep in the budget it was practically invisible. The total amount siphoned from my company, from Meridian, over the last 18 months, was just under $3 million. He wasn't just planning to steal from me in the divorce. He had been stealing from me all along. I picked up the phone. Monica. Did you find it? She asked. I found it. Cole Strategic Partners LLC, nearly $3 million. There was a pause, a deep, satisfied sound from her. That, combined with the forgeries, he's not just a civil defendant anymore. Addison, he's a felon. I know, I said, looking at the spreadsheet, at the long list of stolen money. We're not just going to win, Monica. No. We're going to burn his reputation to the ground. We had the evidence, the fraudulent audit trail, the Cole Strategic Partners LLC, the nearly $3 million in siphoned funds, the forgeries. A normal person, a sane person, would have handed this tidy, explosive package straight to the district attorney. But I am not just a normal person. I am my grandmother's granddaughter. I was sitting in Monica Hartfield's office, the damning evidence glowing on her conference room monitor. This is a clean conviction, Monica said, her voice betraying a rare hint of satisfaction. We hand this over. The state picks it up. He's arrested by tomorrow. No, I said. Monica raised an eyebrow. No, Addison. This is the win. He'll go to prison for at least 5 to 7 years. 5 to 7 years isn't a win. It's a pause, I replied, standing up. He'll get out, change his name, and find another Julia, another Evelyn. He's a predator. Prison won't cure him. It will just teach him to be a better criminal. He's not just a felon. He's a social climber. That's his real weakness. I turned to face her. Damien isn't afraid of prison. Not really. He's terrified of obscurity. He's terrified of being seen as small, unsuccessful, and pathetic. He didn't just want my money, Monica. He wanted my name. He wanted my access. He wanted to sit at the table with the very people who wouldn't have given him the time of day otherwise. He wants to be in the elite circle he always told me I wasn't good enough for, I said, the memory of his condescension sharpening my voice. So, Monica said, a slow, cold smile spreading across her face. She understood immediately. We don't just send him to prison. We ruin him with the very people he idolizes. We make him socially bankrupt, I said. We're going to give him the one thing he always wanted, a starring role in front of the entire Riverton establishment, but it's not going to be his coronation. It's going to be his public execution. The plan was a heist, and I was the architect. The first step was the guest list. This couldn't be a random party. It had to be the party. I spent the next 2 days on my private line, not texting, not emailing, but calling. I called the people whose names were carved into the stone of New York's oldest institutions, the old money fixtures, the family fund managers, the quiet billionaires who saw my grandmother as their contemporary. Judge Hamlin, I'd say, my voice low, urgent. It's Addison Stewart. I'm calling because I've uncovered a rather sophisticated financial fraud, a pattern. It seems designed to target established families, people like us. I'm hosting a small, urgent gathering at Riverton this Saturday night, 8 o'clock. I've found something I believe every person responsible for a legacy portfolio needs to see. It was the perfect bait. I didn't mention a party. I mentioned a threat to their portfolios. They wouldn't just come. They would come prepared to take notes. The second step was the press. I didn't want gossip columnists. I wanted snipers. Monica's team leaked an anonymous, encrypted tip to 2 very specific journalists. One was a Pulitzer finalist who specialized in white-collar crime for a major online financial journal. The other was a broadcast reporter known for her devastating investigations into romantic fraud. The tip was simple. Damian Cole, husband of Addison Stewart Meridian, is the center of a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. Evidence to be presented at their Riverton home. Saturday, 8 p.m. Sources say he's a serial predator targeting high-net-worth women. You'll want to be here. They wouldn't be allowed in the gates, but I knew they'd be parked a quarter mile down the road. Their cameras and long-range microphones aimed at my house. The humiliation had to be public. The third step was the law. This had to be legal. Monica met with Sergeant Dana Whitfield of the State Economic Crimes Division. This wasn't a call. It was a formal presentation. She laid out the wire fraud, the forged signatures, the $3 million theft. My client has unique concerns, Monica explained, in her driest voice. She wants to ensure the arrest happens in a controlled environment, to minimize collateral damage to her corporation and to send a message to her peers. She is hosting a gathering on Saturday. The suspect will be there. We are providing you with a full, actionable case. We would like you and your team to be present to accept the final evidence and take Mr. Cole into custody. Whitfield was, understandably, hesitant. This isn't a TV show, Ms. Hartfield. We don't do sting operations for domestic disputes. This isn't a domestic dispute, Sergeant, I said, stepping into the meeting. This is a corporate liquidation. He's been robbing my company for 18 months. I am the CEO. I am simply giving you the time and place of the suspect. You can arrest him on the street on Monday, or you can arrest him in my home on Saturday, immediately after he incriminates himself in front of 30 witnesses. Your call. Whitfield looked at the binder. We'll have 2 unmarked cars on the property at 8:30. You have until 9 to get what you need. The fourth step was the theater. I hired a specialized AV team, the kind that sweeps embassies for bugs to come in and install them. We put 4 high-definition microcameras in the main gallery, hidden in the cornices. We installed directional microphones. We took down a large, abstract painting one Damien had always hated and replaced it with a custom-built frame that concealed a 60-inch screen, ready to drop on my command. My security team recovered the audio files from the smart home system Damien had so thoughtfully installed. He loved asking it to play music and tell him the weather. He had no idea it recorded. We found the file, the audio from the bedroom, the day I caught him. Not the part where I walked in, but the part after I'd left. His voice, not panicked, but cold, calculating. Sabrina, stop crying. It's fine. The old bat is gone. This just accelerates the timeline. Once the divorce is filed, she'll settle. We sell this house. We take the art. We split the cash. And we're in Barcelona before Christmas. It was the final nail. It wasn't just fraud. It was conspiracy. The final step was the lure. Damien had been calling, texting, leaving furious, panicked messages from his hotel. "Addison, this is absurd. Stop hiding. We need to talk. My lawyers are going to destroy you." He was getting scared, a cornered animal. I waited until 1 a.m. on Thursday, then I sent him a single text message. My first and only direct communication since I'd left. "You're right. I'm tired. I've been with my lawyers. I can't fight this. I just want it to be over. Come to the house Saturday night, 8. We can talk through the terms, finalize everything. I just want this done." It was a masterpiece of bait. I gave him everything he wanted to hear. "I'm tired" meant I'm broken. "I can't fight" meant I'm weak. "Finalize the terms" meant you've won. His reply came in less than 30 seconds. "Of course, Addie. I knew you'd see reason. I'm glad you're being civilized. I'll be there." The day of. I walked through the house. The hideous Italian sofa he'd ordered was gone, donated to a shelter. The glass and chrome desk was in the trash. I had the staff bring my grandmother's furniture back from storage. The heavy, dark mahogany, the worn, priceless Persian rugs, the solid, imposing furniture that smelled of wax and history. The house was no longer a compromised territory. It was a fortress. I went to my vault. I laid out my armor, not a slinky revenge dress. I chose a vintage Chanel suit, wool boucle and a dark, severe navy. It had been my grandmother's. It was simple, tailored, and radiated the kind of power that cannot be bought. I clasped her pearls around my neck, heavy, cold, and real. I slid her ring onto my finger. It was an image of the very pedigree he had worshipped, the very old money he'd tried to fabricate. The stage was set. The cameras were live. The police were on standby. The jury was on its way. He thought he was coming for a negotiation. He was walking into his own wake. The guests arrived early, not just on time, but early. This, I knew, was a sign of their seriousness. Judge Hamlin was the first, his face a mask of judicial gravity. He was followed by the board members of two of the largest family-run foundations in the state. By 8 o'clock, the main gallery, which I had deliberately underlit, was already filled with the low, powerful murmur of old money. These were not Damien's friends. These were not the flashy, new money real estate developers he courted. These were the gatekeepers, the people he had spent 5 years desperately trying to impress, the ones he only ever saw at a distance at galas. Tonight, they were in his, no, my house, and they were here for me. I stood by the fireplace, nursing a single glass of sparkling water. I was not a host. I was a curator, waiting for the final piece of the exhibition to arrive. At 8:15, he came. The crunch of the leased BMW's tires on the gravel was audible even over the polite chatter. My security team, discreetly posted at the door, let him in without a word. Damien walked into the foyer, and I watched him stop dead. He had Sabrina Vale on his arm. She was wearing a red dress that was, by at least 2 inches, too short for the audience. She was preened and polished, ready for her debut as the new lady of the manor. Damien himself was immaculate in a custom Brioni suit, his hair perfect, a look of confident, magnanimous victory on his face. He was the conqueror, here to accept the terms of my surrender. His eyes scanned the room. The confidence didn't just falter, it evaporated. I saw the muscles in his jaw bunch as he took in the scene. This wasn't a private, tearful negotiation with his defeated wife. This was a room full of the most powerful people in the Hudson Valley. This was the Hamlin Circle. This was the board of the Philharmonic. This was, in short, his entire wish list. And they were all staring at him. He was trapped. He couldn't leave. That would be a show of weakness. He couldn't stay. He had no idea what the script was. He saw me, and his face darkened. He left Sabrina by the doorway like a piece of luggage and strode towards me, his steps fast and angry. He grabbed my elbow, his fingers digging in. "What is this?" he hissed, his voice a low growl. The smile lines around his eyes now crinkles of pure rage. "You said it would be just us. You said we were talking terms. I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up to his face. I didn't pull away. I didn't flinch. I just smiled. That same small, tight, precise smile. I changed my mind, I said, my voice just as quiet. I thought they should be here to witness it, to make sure everything is fair. You're always talking about fairness, Damien. He was speechless, his face mottling with a dull red. He knew he'd been played, but he didn't know the game yet. I gently, deliberately, removed his hand from my elbow. Come on, you should say hello. You've wanted their attention for so long. Before he could protest, I turned and walked towards Judge Hamlin, knowing he would have to follow. To do anything else would be to cause a scene, and he wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Judge Hamlin, I said, my voice clear and warm. I'm so glad you could come. You know my husband. Don't you? Damien was forced to put on his mask. He stuck out his hand. Judge, a pleasure to see you. I didn't realize Addison's little discussion was a spectator sport. I smiled. Judge Hamlin, this is Damien Cole. I enunciated his full name. Damien Cole, the name on the LLC, the name on the list of victims. I wanted it to ring in the air, to match the files I was about to show them. And you, I said, turning to the formidable chairwoman of the State Arts Council, you must meet Damien Cole. I led him around the room like a show pony, a prize I was about to send to the glue factory. I introduced him, over and over. Damien Cole. This is Damien Cole. With every introduction, his face got tighter, his smile more of a rictus. He was drowning in a sea of his own ambition. He could feel the trap closing, the social pressure building. Sabrina had, by this point, drifted into the room, looking lost and out of place, clutching her champagne flute like a life raft. Damien saw her, and in his panic, he made his move. He decided that if this was a trial, he would be the one to get ahead of the narrative. He would strike first. He walked to the center of the room, right under the main chandelier, and he tapped a glass, the same move he'd tried at his party. The room fell silent. He was panicking, but he was still a performer. He put his arm around Sabrina, who looked momentarily relieved to be given a role. Thank you all for coming, he said, his voice booming with false confidence. He was trying to take ownership of the room, of the event. I know this is unconventional. Addison and I, he gestured to me, are in the process of a very amicable separation, and I, for one, am just so thrilled to be moving forward, to be starting a new, more honest chapter of my life. He pulled Sabrina closer. And I want to introduce you all to the reason for that new chapter. My girlfriend, Sabrina Vale. The air in the room didn't just get cold. It froze. It was a scandal. Delivered on a silver platter. Judge Hamlin's face was unreadable. The women in the room looked at Sabrina with a kind of clinical, blood-chilling pity. Damien wasn't done. He was on a roll. He was setting his own stage. He turned to me, a look of profound, patronizing pity on his face. And I want to thank my ex-wife, Addison, he said, the word ex-wife slicing through the air like a guillotine, for hosting us, for being so civilized. As we finalize the last details, it's time. I think we all moved on. He had done it. He had cast himself as the man of action, the one who had moved on. He had cast Sabrina as the future, and he had, in one devastating social blow, cast me as the past, the ex-wife, the host of his new life. I let his words hang in the air. I let the silence stretch, just as I had before. I let the full, horrifying, social suicide bomb weight of what he had just done settle over the room. Sabrina was starting to look unwell. This was not the glamorous debut she had been promised. She was looking at the faces of the women in the room, women who could end her social life with a single, unreturned phone call, and she was seeing open contempt. She was seeing that he hadn't just introduced her as his girlfriend, he had introduced her as a homewrecker. In the home she had wrecked, I watched Damien. He was breathing hard, defiant. He thought he had won. I stepped forward, into the light of the chandelier. I didn't raise my voice. "That was a very lovely speech, Damien," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. "But you've always been one for premature declarations." His head snapped toward me. "First," I said, holding up one finger, "we are not divorced. We are not, in fact, even legally separated. This is not an amicable moving on. This is an active negotiation." The room inhaled. "Second," I said, "this is not our house to host in. This is my house, my property, part of the Stewart estate, which, as I'm sure my lawyers will be happy to reconfirm for you, is entirely separate from any marital property. So you are not the host. Damien, you are, at this moment, an uninvited guest." I could see the pulse in his throat, hammering. "And third," I said, "your girlfriend is lovely, but as you are still, in the eyes of the law, my husband, this isn't a new chapter, it's adultery, and in New York, that still has consequences." He was sputtering. "Addison, this is not... You're making a fool of yourself. Am I..." I looked past him, to the back of the room, to the technician I'd codenamed Zeus. "You told me, Damien, that I would never fit into your elite circle, that I was too blunt, too practical. Well, I'm here, and they're here, and I'm just blunt enough to tell the truth." I gave Zeus the smallest, slightest nod. "You've heard his introduction," I said, my voice ringing with a new, cold authority. "Now, I'd like to present my rebuttal." There was a faint whirring sound, and the room, already silent, held its breath. Damien looked up, his eyes, which had been narrowed at me in pure, animal hatred, were now wide with confusion. He followed the gaze of all 30 guests. From a hidden recess above the mantelpiece, the 60-inch screen I had installed was lowering. It glided down, silent as a spider, covering the priceless abstract he had always loathed. "Addison, what is this?" he demanded. "What is this?" "Theater, I'm not playing this game." "Oh, but you are. Damien," I said. My voice was no longer quiet. It was clear, resonant, and amplified by the hidden microphones I'd had installed. Every person in the room, including the 2 plainclothes officers waiting in the library, could hear every word. "You've been playing this game for years. You just didn't know I was keeping score. This," I said, as the screen flickered to life, "is just the final round." The screen was blindingly white for a moment, and then it resolved into a document, a Delaware LLC registration. "Cole Strategic Partners, LLC, I announced, my voice as calm and clinical as if I were presenting a quarterly earnings report. "Sound familiar? It's your company, registered to a post office box in Wilmington." Damien's face went from red to a pasty, sick white. "You're a very good consultant, Damien," I continued, as I clicked to the next slide. "So good, in fact, that you've been consulting for me, without my knowledge, for 18 months, the screen filled with bank transfers, line item after line item. West Bay Project Logistical Consultation Fee, $45,000. Vendor Management Services, $30,000. On, and at the bottom, a running total, updating in real time, $2,874,000. This is illegal," he stammered, looking around at the guests, trying to find an ally. This is proprietary company information. You can't just..." "I can," I said. "I am the company, and this is the forgery." The final image appeared, a digital scan, side by side. On the left, my actual, complex, practice signature from our prenuptial agreement. On the right, a shaky, passable if you don't look close attempt. It was on the addendum he'd forged, the one granting him joint oversight of the Riverton house. A low murmur went through the room. Judge Hamlin's eyes were fixed on the screen, his face a mask of cold fury. He knew a forged document when he saw one. But you see, ladies and gentlemen, I said, pacing slightly, a CEO on a stage. The most fascinating part isn't just that he's a thief, it's that he's not very original. I clicked again. A new file opened. A smiling, hopeful-looking woman with dark hair. Exhibit A, Julia Markham, Austin, Texas, 2014, a biotech founder. He met her by accidentally spilling champagne on her dress at a fundraiser. Within 6 months, he was consulting for her. When they divorced, he walked away with $500,000 and her company was in ruins. Damien was shaking his head, trying to speak, but no words were coming out. I clicked again. A new face, softer, blonde, with a trusting smile. Exhibit B, Evelyn Price, Charleston, South Carolina, 2016, a banking heiress. He infiltrated her family trust, created a shell company sound familiar, and siphoned off an unknown amount before she had a complete mental breakdown. She's still in a private care facility. Her family is still trying to untangle the financial web of forgeries he left behind. I turned to face him fully. It's the same script, isn't it, Damien? You just get better actors. You find a weakness. You play the self-made man card. You get inside, you consult, and you drain them. I was just version 3. You're insane, he finally roared. Finding his voice, he pointed a shaking finger at me. You are a vindictive, jealous, lying bitch. You're making this all up because I don't want you because I left you for her. He gestured to Sabrina, who was standing frozen, her face ashen. Am I asked, my voice dangerously soft. Am I making it up? Or was this just the exit strategy? I gave the signal. I didn't click. I just spoke. Play the audio. There was a crackle, and then his voice, cold, clear, and stripped of all its charm. His voice. Sabrina, stop crying. It's fine. The old bat is gone. This just accelerates the timeline. Once the divorce is filed, she'll settle. We sell this house, we take the art, we split the cash, and we're in Barcelona before Christmas. The silence that followed was absolute. Every eye in the room swiveled from the screen to Sabrina Vale. She looked like she'd been struck by lightning. She whispered, her voice trembling. No, that's not. He told me you were fine with it, she suddenly shrieked, her voice pitching into hysteria. She wasn't looking at the crowd. She was looking at me. He told me you wanted this, that you were settling, that it was all amicable. He said we were just waiting for you to sign. He lied to me. She wasn't a co-conspirator. She was just the next idiot, the next tool. That was when Damien truly broke. The mask of the sophisticated financier shattered, and the rat underneath was exposed. Shut up, you stupid little, he screamed at Sabrina, before turning on me, his face purple with rage. You did this. You set me up. This is entrapment. This is, I'm going to sue you for what, Mr. Cole? The voice was new. It was calm, female, and held absolute authority. The doors from the library opened. Sergeant Dana Whitfield stepped into the room, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. She was holding her badge up, but no one in the room needed to see it. Her presence was enough. This isn't making it up, Mr. Cole, Sergeant Whitfield said. Her eyes locked on him. We've been listening for the last 10 minutes. We heard the audio. We heard your reaction. Damien froze. The blood drained from his face, leaving it a waxy, terrifying gray. He looked from Whitfield, to the officers, to me. The realization hit him, not as a wave, but as a physical, crushing blow. I walked forward, past him, toward the sergeant. I held out the sleek black USB drive. Sergeant Whitfield, I said, my voice crisp and formal. As discussed, here is the full, notarized forensic audit of Meridian Stewart Holdings, detailing the wire fraud. It's accompanied by the full chain of custody for the audio file, as well as the original forged documents, all as prepared by my attorney, Monica Hartfield. I handed it to her, a simple, clean transfer of power. I turned back to the room. The guests Damien's elite circle were staring, but they weren't looking at me. They were looking at him, the respect, the fear, the envy he had tried so hard to cultivate. It was all gone, replaced by a cold, unified, withering disgust. They were looking at him the way they'd look at a bug, a common, vulgar, pathetic little criminal who had tracked mud on their expensive carpets. "Damien Cole," Sergeant Whitfield said, "you are under arrest for multiple counts of wire fraud, grand larceny, and forgery." The uniformed officers stepped forward. They didn't ask. They didn't hesitate. One grabbed his left arm, one his right. "You can't do this," he whispered, his voice cracking. I have rights. I have a lawyer." "You have the right to remain silent," the officer said, pulling his arms behind his back with practiced, brutal efficiency. They pushed him forward, forcing him to his knees on my grandmother's priceless Kerman rug. The click of the handcuffs as they locked around his wrists was the loudest, most satisfying sound I have ever heard. They hauled him up. He was a puppet with his strings cut. They were marching him out. Past me, past the jury of his peers. As he passed, he looked at me, his eyes hollow, uncomprehending. He had lost. I leaned in, my voice just a whisper, meant for him and him alone. The final ledger entry. "You told me I'd never fit into your circle." "Damien," I said, my voice colder than the ice in his heart. "You said I wasn't good enough for them. You said I'd never be accepted." I paused, letting him look at the faces of Judge Hamlin, of the board members, of the matriarchs, all standing silently with me. "Look around," I said. "Who do you think they're standing with now?" He didn't have an answer. He just flinched, as if I'd struck him. The officers pushed him out the front door, into the flashbulbs of the press I'd known would be waiting. The flashbulbs were a feeding frenzy. By the time Sergeant Whitfield's car had cleared the gates, the footage was already on the internet. The videos, taken by the reporters I'd baited and by the guests who were now witnesses, went viral before Damien had even been processed. The headlines were a brutal, beautiful storm. "Riverton heiress springs trap on conman husband." "The Gala of Guillotines. How Addison Stewart took down the wedding viper." "Meridian CEO exposes million-dollar fraud at a cocktail party." My phone, which I'd left in the library, was a solid brick of vibration. Texts, emails, missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize, and from numbers I knew by heart. Social media was a wildfire. I was a trending topic. Damien's lawyers, the ones he'd hired to bleed me dry, were putting out statements, but they were drowned out by the noise. They were claiming entrapment, a domestic dispute gone wrong, a woman scorned. I would not let them have that narrative. I let the media frenzy build for exactly 48 hours. Then, I made one phone call. I didn't go to a morning show. I didn't talk to a celebrity journalist. I called the editor-in-chief of the most respected financial journal in the country. "You want an interview?" I said. When he picked up, his voice startled. "You get one? Tonight? My office? You get 1 hour. You don't ask about the dress. You don't ask about my feelings. You ask me about the fraud. You ask me about the audit. You ask me about the shell company. This is not a gossip story. This is a business story." I sat across from him in the Meridian boardroom. I wore a simple black sheath. I was not a wife. I was a CEO. "Mrs. Stewart," he began. "Ms. Stewart," I corrected him. "My name is Addison Stewart. Ms. Stewart, the press is painting this as a deeply personal, emotional event." "The press is mistaken," I said, my voice as cool as the water in my glass. What happened in my home was not a scorned wife lashing out. It was a CEO, a founder, and a board chair protecting her assets. Mr. Cole, an employee of my firm, was discovered to have engaged in systematic wire fraud, siphoning nearly $3 million from my company. I identified the threat. I gathered the evidence. I coordinated with law enforcement, and I neutralized the threat. The party was simply the most efficient venue for a controlled detonation. The journalist was scribbling, his pen flying. This wasn't about infidelity, I said, leaning forward, my eyes locked on his. It's about fiduciary responsibility. It's about romantic fraud as a viable and terrifying form of corporate infiltration. He didn't just break a marriage, he broke federal law. He used emotion as a crowbar to gain access to my company. I am speaking tonight not as a victim, but as a case study, a warning to every other person, man or woman, who runs a family office or a private fund. Your greatest security threat might not be a hacker in Russia. It might be the person you're sharing a bed with. The article that came out the next morning was a masterpiece of controlled demolition. It wasn't about my marriage. It was about my strength. The narrative was mine. The day it was published, my office received 2 calls. The first was from a law firm in Austin, representing Julia Markham's family. We just wanted to thank you, her brother said, his voice thick. We've been fighting him for years. The DA here wouldn't touch it. Your story, it's given us new life. We're refiling. The second call was from a lawyer in Charleston, representing the Price family. Evelyn's brother would like to send his appreciation and his files. He'd like to add his evidence to your prosecution to ensure Mr. Cole never sees the light of day. The pattern I had presented was now a class action suit in the making, but my biggest battle was internal. The scandal was a tremor, and Meridian Stewart Holdings was at the epicenter. My board was nervous. My shareholders were emailing. My clients were calling, wondering if their money was safe. I didn't send a memo. I called an all-hands, mandatory attendance town hall. I stood on the stage in the center of our main trading floor. "Good morning," I said. The room was so quiet. You could hear the air conditioners. I'm sure you've all read the news, and I'm sure you're all wondering what the hell is going on. So let me be blunt. I looked out at the faces. We had a security breach. It wasn't a firewall. It was a person I brought into this company. That was my mistake, and I am here to tell you how I have fixed it. I laid it out. As of 8 a.m. this morning, I have signed an executive order overhauling our entire project approval and vendor management system. All consultant contracts are frozen, pending a full review. Any project introduced by a non-employee, it will now require the sign-off of not 1, but 3 senior VPs, as well as a full forensic audit by an outside firm. We were vulnerable. I was vulnerable. It will never happen again. I could see the shift in the room. They had come in expecting a tearful, personal apology. I was giving them a corporate restructuring. I was giving them strength. Damian Cole thought he could use my company as his personal piggy bank, I said, my voice dropping. He mistook my trust for weakness. He mistook our focus on results for an opportunity to skim. He was wrong. What he did was a crime. What I did, in response, was a promise to every single one of you, and to every one of our clients, that I will protect this firm. I will protect my grandmother's legacy, and I will burn to the ground anyone, or anything, that tries to harm it. I paused. Now, who has questions about the new quarterly projections? The room exploded in applause. It wasn't just relief, it was respect. I hadn't just survived a crisis, I had turned it into a demonstration of absolute control. In the midst of this, a quiet email landed in my personal inbox. It was from a generic, new Gmail address. It was from Sabrina Vale. It was an apology, a long, rambling, semi-coherent, and utterly terrified one. She hadn't known. She thought I was out of the picture. She thought he was a brilliant man who was stuck in a cold marriage. He had sold her a script, too, and attached to the email a series of PDFs, screenshots of his texts to her. The old bat will sign anything. She's still in love with me. Just play the part, baby, and you'll be wearing diamonds in Barcelona. It was more evidence. It was pathetic. I forwarded it to Monica with a simple note. Add this to the pile. But we don't go after her. She's irrelevant. The final move came a week later. I received a formal, official letter, not from Damien, but from his new, court-appointed public defender. His high-priced litigators had dropped him the second his arrest hit the wire and my asset freeze hit his bank accounts. The letter was a joke. His lawyer was requesting a private, off-the-record meeting to discuss a potential settlement that would avoid a messy public trial. He was in a jail cell, facing a 10-year mandatory minimum for fraud, and he was still trying to negotiate, still trying to get a peace. I had Monica send back a one-sentence reply, no. And then, the real shift happened. My social life, which I had always treated as a chore, transformed. The invitations started to arrive, not for galas, not for fundraisers, but for meetings. An invitation from Judge Hamlin's wife to join the acquisitions committee at the art museum, the one Damien had always wanted to be on. An email from the head of the oldest family office in the state. Addison, I'd love to pick your brain on asset security. What you did was remarkable. Cocktails. The elite circle. His elite circle wasn't just accepting me, they were following me. They weren't just watching me on social media. They were sending friend requests. They didn't want to talk about dresses or decor. They wanted to talk about my audit process. They wanted to know about romantic fraud. I wasn't the woman who had been cheated on. I was the woman who had set the trap. I was the woman who had drawn a line, in their world, a world built on protecting legacies. I hadn't been a victim. I had been a good fiduciary. I was no longer the woman Damien Cole said would never fit in. I was the one they were all trying to keep up with. I wasn't just in the circle. I was the one redrawing it. The criminal trial was, by all accounts, a public relations disaster for Damien. His public defender, a harried young woman with perpetually slipping glasses, was woefully out of her depth. She was used to arguing over possession charges, not complex, multi-million-dollar wire fraud. Her entire defense strategy, as she laid it out in her opening statement, was the one Damien had fed her. It was the only story he knew how to tell. This is not a criminal case, she argued, her voice thin in the cavernous, wood-paneled courtroom. This is a divorce, a bitter, ugly divorce. This is a case about a woman, a very, very wealthy woman, who was scorned. This, she said, gesturing to me, is a wife who is using the full force of the state, the full weight of her family's name, to punish her husband for the simple, human sin of falling in love with another woman. She was trying to paint me as Medea, the courtroom, packed with the press and, more importantly, with the entire elite circle, who had been at the party, just looked bored. They had already seen the evidence. They had been at the arraignment. When I took the stand, the prosecutor didn't even have to do much. He just had to tee up the questions. Ms. Stewart, he began, the defense has characterized this as a personal vendetta. How would you respond? I looked at the jury. I looked at the judge. I looked at the gallery, where Judge Hamlin sat in the front row, not as a jurist, but as a spectator. I would respond, I said, my voice as clear and steady as it was in a boardroom, that the defense is confusing personal with personally. This case is not about a broken heart. It is about a broken law. It is about the systematic, criminal infiltration of my company, Meridian Stewart Holdings, when I discovered an employee, Mr. Cole, had siphoned nearly $3 million via a shell company. When I discovered he had forged my signature on legal documents in an attempt to seize my family's assets, I did what any CEO would do. I gathered the evidence, I contained the threat, and I reported it to the authorities. This is not a domestic issue. This is a felony. I spoke for 2 hours. I walked the jury through the audit, line by line. I explained, in simple, clear terms, what wire fraud meant. I explained how his forged addendum was an attempt to bypass my grandmother's trust. I was not a woman scorned. I was a fiduciary, and I was giving my report. The prosecution then built the tower. They brought in the brother of Julia Markham, who detailed the consulting fees and the accidental champagne spill. They brought in the lawyers for the Price family, who, with Evelyn's brother's consent, presented the forged loan documents from South Carolina. The pattern was undeniable. This wasn't a man who fell in love. This was a man with a playbook, the most pathetic and most damning. Witness was Sabrina Vale. She was called by the prosecution. She shuffled to the stand. No longer in cobalt satin, she was wearing a beige cardigan and no makeup. She looked like a ghost. "Can you confirm," the prosecutor asked, "that this is your voice on this audio recording?" He played it, the courtroom filled with that awful tinny sound. "We sell this house, we take the art, we split the cash." Sabrina was openly weeping. "Yes," she whispered. That's him." "And did he, in fact, tell you that Ms. Stewart was amicable to this, that she was fine with him selling her home?" "He told me she wanted it," Sabrina sobbed. "He told me he was brilliant and I was going to be. He said we were going to Barcelona. He lied about everything. I didn't know. I never would have." She was a con artist's collateral damage, but her tears sealed the conspiracy charge. Damien, I could see, was finished. He sat at the defense table, his cheap suit a far cry from his Brioni rumpled. He was a dead man walking, and then his lawyer stood up. "The defense calls Damien Cole." This was it, the final, desperate, idiotic move. His lawyer must have begged him not to, but Damien's ego wouldn't allow him to be silent. He had to perform. He got on the stand and he lied with an artistry that was, in its own way, breathtaking. He was the victim. I was the monster. I was the cold, calculating old bat. He had given me the West Bay project. He had modernized my firm. The $3 million. That was his rightful share, a consulting fee I had verbally agreed to. And then, his lawyer said, "Your Honor, the defense would like to submit one final piece of evidence, a document that proves Mr. Cole's claims, a joint venture agreement, a capital contribution contract, signed by both Mr. Cole and Miss Stewart, guaranteeing him a 40% share of all new real estate ventures." The lawyer, with a flourish, produced a document. I looked at Monica, who was sitting behind the prosecutor. She was smiling, the exact same smile I'd given Damien at the party. We had been waiting for this. The prosecutor took the document, looked at it, and showed it to me. "Ms. Stewart, is this your signature?" I looked at the forgery. It was better than the last one. He'd had time to practice. "No," I said, simply. "It's a lie," Damien shouted from the stand, breaking all protocol. "She's lying. That's her signature." The judge banged his gavel. "Mr. Cole, you will be silent. Counselor, you have rebuttal." "We do, Your Honor," the prosecutor said. "The state would like to call Monica Hartfield to the stand as a forensic expert." Monica walked to the stand. She was sworn in. "Ms. Hartfield," the prosecutor said, "you are an attorney, but you also have other resources." "I do," Monica said, her voice dry. "When Mr. Cole was taken into custody, his personal laptop was seized under a lawful warrant. My team assisted the state in a forensic examination of that laptop, a very deep examination." She looked at Damien. "This document," she said, holding up the defense's evidence, "is a fascinating piece of fiction, and it was created, according to the metadata on Mr. Cole's hard drive, 3 weeks ago." The courtroom went silent. "While he was in a jail cell, awaiting trial," Monica continued, her voice like ice, "he created this forgery on his laptop after he had already been arrested. He then emailed it to his lawyer, claiming he had just found it in his old files. It is not just a forgery, Your Honor. It is a new, separate, and truly pathetic crime. It is an act of fraud, committed against this very court. The judge, a man who had seen everything, when a color of red I had not thought humanly possible. He didn't just look at Damien. He glared. He glared with a fury that was biblical. He was not just a criminal. He had insulted the judge's intelligence. "Mr. Cole," the judge said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. "You have not just been found guilty by a jury of your peers. You have sat in my courtroom, under oath, and you have continued your pattern of lies. You have attempted to perpetrate a fraud on this court. It is the most brazen, idiotic, and insulting display I have seen in my 20 years on this bench." The sentencing was swift. It was not 5 years. It was not 10. With the new charges, the pattern of behavior, and the open contempt of court, the judge gave him the maximum, 25 years. He would be an old, broken man when he got out, his network long since dissolved into dust. As the officers cuffed him, this time for the last time, he was a hollow shell. He looked small. He wasn't a predator. He was just a pathetic, hungry ghost. They led him past the gallery, past me. He stopped, just for a second. The rage was gone, replaced by that old, familiar, condescending pity. "You win, Addison," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "You win the house, the money, but you'll always be the girl who doesn't fit in. You'll never be one of them. You'll always be blunt." He thought it was his last, perfect, cutting remark. I didn't answer. I just looked at him, and then I turned my gaze, very slowly, to the front row of the gallery. Judge Hamlin was standing up. The chairwoman of the Arts Council was standing. The heads of the family funds, the old money matriarchs, the very elite circle he had worshipped, they were all standing, and they weren't looking at him. They were looking at me, and they were, one by one, beginning to clap. I walked out of the courthouse, not as a widow, not as an ex-wife, but as Addison Stewart. The press was a wall of noise, but I ignored them. A black car, not mine, was waiting at the curb. Judge Hamlin's wife, a woman who terrified half of New York, opened the door for me. "Addison," she said, her voice like gravel, but her eyes warm. "Remarkable. We're on our way to a meeting, a few of us." She gestured inside the car, where the others were waiting. "Are forming a new fund, a charitable task force, to help victims of this kind of fraud, to protect people like Evelyn Price. We need someone to run it, someone with a particular set of skills, someone blunt." I looked at her. I looked at the car full of the most powerful people in the state. "The circle," I smiled. My revenge wasn't just his imprisonment. It wasn't just taking back my money. It was this. It was realizing he was right. I didn't fit into his world of pretense and borrowed glory. I was here to build my own. I was here to take the world he said I'd never belong to and give it my name. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know your thoughts, so please comment down below and tell me where you're listening from. Let's connect. And don't forget to subscribe to Zoe Revenge Stories. Like this video, and hit that hype button so this story can be heard by more people.